You want to know the precise moment I realized my day had taken a definitive turn for the worse? It wasn't the dropship shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, las bolts from Ork ground fire painting pretty little red lines of death past the viewports. It wasn't the frantic, static-filled chatter over the Vox from other squads being overrun, their transmissions cutting off with wet, final sounds. It wasn't even the Imperial Guard sergeant with the 1,000-yard stare who just kept repeating, "The green tide, the endless green tide," like a broken prayer wheel. No, it was the smell. The moment the assault ramp hissed open, it hit me. A wall of stench so physical it felt like a punch to the sinuses. It was a thick, biological miasma of unwashed fungus, crude promethium, ozone from shoddy energy weapons, the coppery tang of fresh blood, and something else, something primal and musky that I can only describe as the scent of pure, undiluted aggression. This was the smell of the Ork. It was the smell of a species that had evolved for war and liked it. "Move, move, move," someone was screaming, their voice cracking with a terror so raw it was almost a separate entity in the cramped compartment. We spilled out into the trench, a muddy, corpse-choked ditch that was the last pathetic line of defense on this emperor-forsaken rock called Golgotha Secundus. The sky was a bruised purple, choked with smoke from 100 different fires. The ground trembled with the constant rhythmic impact of heavy artillery, a bass note to the symphony of destruction playing out around us. And then I saw them, the Orks. Imperial propaganda doesn't do them justice. They aren't just big, green, and stupid. They are a force of nature, a wave of seething, shouting, laughing violence. They crashed into our lines, not with the disciplined silence of the Astra Militarum or the cold fury of the Adeptus Astartes, but with the joyous, chaotic abandon of children let loose in a candy store, if the candy was dismemberment and the store was a battlefield. I raised my standard-issue lasgun, the stock feeling flimsy and pathetic in my hands. I sighted down the barrel at a hulking brute wearing armor made from what looked like a street sign and a truck door. I squeezed the trigger. The red beam lanced out and struck him square in the chest. A perfect shot. It left a blackened, smoldering crater in his flesh. The Ork stopped, looked down at the wound, poked it with a thick, grimy finger. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a laugh of pain or defiance. It was a genuine, deep-bellied roar of amusement, like I just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. He pointed a choppa, a crude axe the size of a small tree, in my direction and bellowed something in his guttural tongue that I'm pretty sure translated to, "Again, do it again." That's when the cold knot of dread first formed in my gut. This wasn't an enemy you could scare or reason with. This was an enemy that enjoyed the process. "Hold the line," a young lieutenant was shrieking, his voice a desperate squeak against the Orkish roar. He was maybe 20, his face a mask of grime and terror. "For the Emperor, not one step back." An Ork truck, a ramshackle monstrosity of rusted metal and spiky bits, rammed through our forward barricade as if it were made of paper. Orks piled out, howling with glee, their shudas, weapons that looked like they'd been assembled from a junkyard by a blind man, blazing indiscriminately. They weren't aiming. They were just pointing in our general direction and unleashing a storm of scrap metal and loud noise, trusting in volume over accuracy. And Emperor help me, it was working. Men were being torn apart, not just killed, dismembered. The Orks didn't fight to eliminate a threat. They fought for the sheer visceral thrill of it. I saw one lift a guardsman clean off his feet and rip him in two with his bare hands, showering himself in gore and laughing like a maniac. This was their recreation. This was their art form. I fired again and again, my lasgun's power pack growing dangerously warm. Each shot seemed to just annoy them, like swatting at a particularly persistent fly. My mind, usually a sanctuary of sarcastic commentary and fourth-wall-breaking observations, was terrifyingly quiet. There was no joke to be made here. This was the grim darkness of the 41st millennium in its purest, most brutal form. I was so focused on the green tide in front of me, I became oblivious to the tactical nuance of the orcish flanking maneuver, which is to say, a bunch of them just ran around the side because they thought it would be more fun. A massive hand, hard as petrified wood, closed around my entire torso and lifted me into the air. My ribs creaked in protest. I was face to face with an orc knob, a leader among the brutes. He was even bigger than the others, his face a roadmap of scars, one eye replaced by a glowing red lens. His breath was a foul blast of rotting meat and crude fungus beer. "Oi, this one's a scrappy little git," he roared, shaking me like a rag doll. "Let's see how far you can fly." He didn't throw me. He punched me. It was less of a punch and more of a localized seismic event. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of pain and shattered bone. I felt my sternum crack, my ribs splinter, my organs turn to pulp. I was airborne, sailing over the trenches, over the fighting, a pink projectile launched by pure orcish enthusiasm. Time seemed to stretch. I had a bird's-eye view of the entire hopeless battle. The Imperial lines were collapsing, pockets of brave men being swallowed by the green wave. The sky was full of tracers and smoke. It was beautiful in a horrifying, apocalyptic kind of way. Then gravity, that cruel and constant mistress, reasserted her dominance. I crashed down through a flimsy roof of corrugated iron, landing in a heap of broken machinery and despair. The impact was final. Darkness swam at the edges of my vision, a sweet, painless oblivion calling my name. My healing factor, that cursed, miraculous blessing, was already screaming to work, knitting bone and stitching flesh back together. But the damage was catastrophic. As I lay there, broken and bleeding out in the dark, my last conscious thought wasn't of the Emperor, or my mission, or even my own mortality. It was a simple, profound, and deeply personal realization. Oh crap, I've been captured by orcs. A return to consciousness was a slow, painful ascent from a deep, black ocean. Every single nerve ending in my body was firing a distress signal. My head pounded in rhythm with my struggling heart. I tried to take a deep breath and was rewarded with a stabbing pain in my chest that told me my ribs were still arguing with my lungs about who got to occupy which space. I was lying on a cold, hard surface. I opened my eyes. The first thing I saw was the cage. It wasn't a sophisticated containment unit. It was a brutalist masterpiece of scrap metal, rusted rebar, and barbed wire, all held together by what I can only assume was spite and a truly staggering amount of crude welding. The bars were thick, the gaps between them too narrow to squeeze through. The door was a solid slab of metal secured by a heavy rusted bolt that looked like it had been salvaged from a tank's suspension system. The second thing I saw were my fellow inmates. In the cage next to mine, a guardsman with a blood-soaked bandage where his left eye should be was staring into the middle distance. His face, a hollow mask. In another, a man in the tattered remains of a tech priest's robes was muttering binary catechisms, his mechadendrites twitching sporadically. And in a third, a man was just rocking back and forth, his arms racked around his knees, whispering the same phrase over and over again. "The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. He didn't sound like he believed it. The third thing I saw, of course, were the guards. 2 orcs were standing right outside my cage having a heated debate. One was built like a small truck with a metal jaw that clicked audibly every time he spoke. The other was leaner, with a lazy eye that seemed to be independently surveying the ceiling. "See? I told you he wasn't dead," Clickjaw said, prodding the bars of my cage with a stick. "His chest is going up and down." "Maybe he's just resting," Lanky suggested, scratching his head with a clawed finger. "We should poke him, see if he squeaks." "Good idea. Get the proper poking stick, not that wimpy one." I decided it was time to introduce myself. Pushing through the pain, I sat up, my back scraping against the rough metal of the cage. "While I'm touched by your concern for my vital signs," I rasped, my voice like gravel, "I can assure you the poking is entirely unnecessary. My body is currently conducting a full internal audit, and the preliminary findings are messy." Both orcs jumped back, startled. They stared at me with a mixture of surprise and intense, almost scientific curiosity. "He talks," Lanky exclaimed, pointing a wobbly finger. "Course he talks, Snazgit, you dolt," Clickjaw retorted, recovering his composure. "All humies talk. That's how you knows they's humies. If they didn't talk, they'd be squigs." Right, Snazgit said, nodding sagely. He leaned in closer, his good eye peering at me. "So, what's your name then, talky humie?" "Wade Wilson. Mercenary, adventurer, part-time cosmic nuisance. And you are?" "I'm Grack," said Clickjaw, thumping his chest plate. "Dis ear is Snazgit. We're your guards. Dat means we get to decide if you live or die today. It's a big responsibility." "Ah, the power of life and death," I said, leaning my head back against the bars. "Heady stuff for a Tuesday. Have you considered the live option? I'm an excellent conversationalist. I can even do impressions. Watch this." I cleared my throat, which sent a fresh spike of pain through my torso. "Heresy grows from idleness," I intoned in my best Imperial Commissar voice. Grack and Snazgit just stared at me, blank-faced. "Tough crowd," I muttered. "The boss says we gotta keep you alive for the games tonight," Grack announced, ignoring my stellar performance. The one-eyed guardsman in the next cage flinched, his single eye widening in terror. The rocking man started praying louder. "Games?" I asked, the cold knot in my stomach tightening into a frozen fist. "That sounds deceptively fun. Are we talking charades? Pictionary? Because I have to warn you, my drawing skills are heavily reliant on stick figures and profanity." Snazgit's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Nah, it's proper fun. Prisoners fight each other, or fight dust squigs. Or sometimes we just shoot 'em and see how long it takes 'em to stop moving. It's the best part of the day." The guardsman next to me finally spoke, his voice a dry, broken whisper. "He's not lying. They take someone every night. They give you a broken weapon or nothing at all. They release a squig or a grot or just let the boys have a go. No one ever comes back. The squigs? They're not animals. They're just hunger made flesh." My bravado, usually my most reliable shield, began to crack. This wasn't an interrogation chamber or a gladiatorial arena with rules. This was slaughterhouse entertainment for a species that found mortal agony the highest form of comedy. Grack and Snazgit, having delivered their cheerful prognosis, wandered off, presumably to source a poking stick of truly legendary proportions. I was left alone in my cage of scrap and scars, the reality of my situation sinking in like poison. My healing factor meant I could survive wounds that would kill any other man. But in this context, that wasn't a blessing. It was a curse. It meant I could provide entertainment for longer. The rocking man's prayers became a frantic, desperate mantra. The Emperor protects, the Emperor protects, the Emperor protects. I looked out through the bars at the Ork camp. It was a sprawling, chaotic mess of ramshackle huts, smoking forges, and piles of looted scrap. Orks everywhere were fighting, working, shouting, laughing. No order, no discipline, just a vast, seething ecosystem of violence and industry. And I was trapped in the heart of it. My only chance was the games. I had to survive whatever they threw at me. I had to find a weapon, create an opportunity, something. Dying wasn't the problem. Dying permanently was a distant concern. But dying over and over again for the amusement of these grinning green maniacs, that was a special kind of hell I wasn't sure I was prepared for. Snasket returned, not with a poking stick, but with a battered metal bowl. He slopped a ladleful of a thick, gray, lumpy substance into my cage. It hit the floor with a wet thwack and sat there, quivering like a frightened jellyfish. "Grub time," he announced proudly. I looked at the food. I looked at Snasget's expectant face. I looked back at the food. It had what appeared to a squig eyeball floating in it. This was my life now. This was the green tide, and I was drowning. Time in the Ork camp was not measured in hours or minutes, but in escalating cycles of violence. The distant, constant thump, thump, thump of a heavy gun served as its heartbeat. The screams of revving engines and the percussive boom of something exploding were its punctuation. I had no idea how long I'd been in that cage. A day? 2? My body's internal clock was scrambled, reset with every new ache and freshly healed fracture. The sludge in the bowl congealed into a substance with the texture and appeal of wet cardboard. Hunger was a gnawing rat in my belly, but the sight of that floating squig eye kept my appetite firmly in check. My fellow prisoners were faring worse. The one-eyed guardsman had stopped staring into the distance and had begun shivering uncontrollably, despite the oppressive heat. The tech priest's binary muttering had taken on a frantic, desperate ganch, and the praying man, he just kept rocking, his voice now a hoarse, broken whisper. The Orks, however, were thriving. Their camp was a monument to controlled, productive chaos. I watched, a captive audience to the most bizarre industrial revolution imaginable. A group of Orks, mechs, I overheard Grak call them, were building what looked like a gargantuan wheeled fortress out of scrap metal, rusted ship hulls, and pure, unadulterated confidence. They weren't using blueprints. They argued, they shouted, they hit things with massive wrenches, and somehow, through a process that would give any Imperial engineer a fatal aneurysm, the structure grew. It shouldn't have held together. It defied gravity, physics, and basic common sense. But it stood, bristling with gun barrels that were clearly just pipes welded together, because the Orks believed it would stand. This was the key. Their collective psychic field, their WAAAGH energy, didn't just empower their weird boys. It warped reality itself on a fundamental level. A red vehicle was faster because they all believed it was. A Shuda made of junk would fire because they refused to entertain the possibility that it wouldn't. They weren't just building machines. They were sculpting reality with hammers and sheer stubborn willpower. I was a prisoner, not just of Xenos, but of a localized reality where the rules were written by the loudest, greenest, and most violently opinionated participants. My musings were interrupted by the arrival of a new Ork. This one was different. He wasn't a hulking brute like Grak or a scrawny git like Snasget. He was of average orc size, but he carried an air of authority. His armor was slightly less patchwork, his posture straighter. In his hands, he carried a slate of rusty metal and a sharpened piece of scrap, which he used as a stylus. He stopped in front of my cage, his beady eyes scrutinizing me with a cold, analytical detachment that was far more frightening than Grack's simple brutality. "You, pink thing," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "I am Kargak. I count things. I make the lists." "A quartermaster," I said, pushing myself up. "Wonderful. I'd like to file a complaint about the accommodations. The mattress is lumpy, the room service is abysmal, and the other guests are depressingly morose." Kargak ignored me. He looked at his slate. Prisoners, initial count 32, current count 27. He made a mark on the slate. The sound of the metal scraping was horribly final. 5. Subtracted. For the games. For morale. My blood ran cold. 5 men. Gone. Just like that. "The boss? He likes a good show," Kargak continued, looking up from his slate and directly at me. "But he gets bored. Same squigs, same screaming humies. It gets predictable. We need something new, something fresh." His eyes traveled over my form, and I felt like a piece of meat being evaluated by a particularly discerning butcher. You are new. You are pink. And you talked back to Grack. That is either very stupid or very interesting. The boss will decide which during the games tonight. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at the praying man. "That one," he said, pointing with his stylus. "He is loud and repetitive. He is predictable. The boss does not like predictable." He made another mark on his slate. "He will be in the first bout against the Grots." The praying man didn't seem to hear. He just kept rocking. "The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects." Kargak walked away, his job done. He was the accountant of death, and he had just balanced his books. A profound silence fell over our corner of the prison camp. The one-eyed guardsman had stopped shivering and was now just staring at the praying man with a look of pure, unmitigated horror. The tech priest had fallen silent. We all knew what that mark on the slate meant. The day wore on, each moment stretching into an eternity of dread. The sun, a sickly yellow orb through the haze of smoke, crawled across the sky. The noise of the camp seemed to grow louder, more frenetic, as if the entire settlement was gearing up for the main event. I could feel the WAAAGH energy building, a psychic pressure that made the air feel thick and heavy, like before a storm. As the light began to fade, the atmosphere in the cages shifted from despair to a kind of numb, resigned terror. The praying man was still at it, his voice now barely audible, a dry rustle of sound. He was reciting the names of saints, his mind retreating to the last bastion of faith he had left. Then they came for him. It wasn't Grack and Snasket. It was 2 larger, more serious-looking orcs. They didn't speak. They just unbolted the door to his cage, reached in and hauled him out. He didn't struggle. He didn't scream. He just kept whispering, his eyes wide and unseen, as they dragged him away towards the source of the roaring crowd. We watched him go. The one-eyed guardsman let out a choked sob and buried his face in his hands. The tech priest began his binary catechisms again, faster and more frantic than before. A few minutes later, the crowd noise from the arena swelled to a deafening crescendo. There was a series of high-pitched shrieks, the sound of tiny, vicious things being unleashed. Then, a single, piercing human scream that was cut off with horrifying suddenness. The crowd roared its approval. The sound was followed by a wave of laughter. The deep, booming laughter of 10,000 orcs finding something absolutely hilarious. Then, silence. Kargak reappeared at the edge of the compound. He didn't look at us. He simply walked to a large, crude tally board made of a sheet of metal propped against a post. Next to a symbol that probably meant grots, he painted a single, thick, red slash. The butcher's bill had been paid. One of the 27 was now 26. The one-eyed guardsman was weeping openly now, his shoulders shaking. They just, for fun. I felt a cold fury building inside me, cutting through the pain and the fear. This wasn't war. This was pest control. This was a species so secure in its own violent superiority that it treated other sentient beings as disposable toys. My usual flippancy felt like a betrayal in the face of such casual, industrial-scale cruelty. The games had begun, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that my name was next on Kargak's list. A roar of the arena was a living thing, a beast of sound and fury that fed on pain and exhaled laughter. After the praying man's subtraction, the mood in the cages was a thick soup of terror. The one-eyed guardsman had retreated into a catatonic state, curled in a fetal position. The tech priest was now silently tracing circuit patterns in the dirt floor of his cage, his mind clearly having checked out. I was the only one still present, still painfully aware of every passing second. I didn't have to wait long. Grak and Snazkit arrived, their earlier casual cruelty replaced with a sense of grim purpose, or as grim as an orc could get, which involved a lot of enthusiastic grinning. "Right, Pinky, your turn," Grak announced, his metal jaw clicking with anticipation as he slammed back the bolt on my cage door. "The boss is expecting a good show. None of that crying and begging like the last one. Boring." "Would you prefer a soliloquy?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Perhaps a mournful ballad about the fleeting nature of existence? I'm a bit rusty, but I'm sure I can ham it up." Snazkit just laughed. "He's still talking funny. This is going to be good." They grabbed me, their grip like industrial vices, and marched me through the camp. Orcs of every size and shape turned to watch, pointing and shouting comments I was probably better off not understanding. The path to the arena was a gauntlet of leering green faces and hungry eyes. I was the main course, and they were all ready to eat. The arena itself was larger than I'd imagined from my cage. A massive circular pit dug deep into the earth, its walls lined with jagged scrap metal to prevent climbing. The bleachers were a teetering mountain of orcdom, a seething mass of green flesh, crude banners, and waving weapons. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, fungus beer, and blood. On his throne of skulls and scrap, the Warboss watched, a massive brute, even larger than the knob who had punched me here. He was a mountain of scar tissue and muscle, encased in haphazard plates of armor welded directly onto his body. One of his arms was a crude, powerful-looking hydraulic claw. He didn't smile or shout. He just observed with a cold, calculating stillness that was far more intimidating than the mindless rage of his followers. The announcer, the scrawny orc with the funnel megaphone, was working the crowd into a frenzy. "And now, for the main event. He's pink, he's a gabby git, and he's proper fresh off the battlefield. Let's hear it for Pinky the Puny." The sound that erupted was beyond anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just noise. It was a physical force, a wave of pure, aggressive, psychic energy that hit me and made the very air vibrate. The WAAAGH was not just a concept here. It was a tangible presence, and it was screaming for blood. Grak shoved me forward into the center of the pit. The dirt was dark and damp, stained with old blood, and worse. A weapon was thrown down in front of me. It was a sword, or a pathetic imitation of one. The blade was a piece of rusty rebar that had been pounded flat on one side. The hilt was wrapped in filthy rags. It was less a weapon and more a deliberate insult. "Your opponent tonight," the announcer screeched. "The dread of the deep pits. Da grinning death. He's hungry and you look tasty. It's Bitey." A heavy iron portcullis on the far side of the arena groaned open. For a moment, there was only darkness. Then a sound emerged, a low, chittering growl that set my teeth on edge, and then it hopped into the light. It was a squig, but this wasn't the spherical gap-tooth I'd been warned about. This thing was larger, about the size of a pony and built like a predatory frog. Its body was a mottled, ugly green, and its entire head was one massive, gaping maw, lined with row upon row of serrated, needle-like teeth. Saliva, thick and acidic, dripped from its jaws, sizzling where it hit the dirt. Its beady black eyes were locked on me with single-minded, ravenous intent. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I muttered, hefting the pathetic rebar sword. "It's a walking stomach with anger issues." The squig, Bitey, tensed its powerful hind legs and launched itself across the arena. It moved with shocking speed, a blur of teeth and fury. I barely had time to dive to the side. It sailed past me, landing with a skid, and immediately pivoted, its mouth gnashing open and shut with a sound like grinding bones. The orcs loved it. They roared with laughter, cheering on the squig. "Dat him, Bitey! Chomp his head off! Look at him dance!" I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a fight, it was feeding time. I gripped the rebar sword, feeling its pathetic weight. There was no finesse here, no skill. This was about survival in its most primitive form. Bitey charged again. This time I stood my ground, waiting until the last possible second. As it leaped, jaws wide enough to swallow my head whole, I thrust the rebar sword forward, aiming for the roof of its mouth. It was a desperate move. The rusty point scraped against its hard palate, doing minimal damage, but the squig recoiled with a surprised squeal, shaking its head. I'd annoyed it. Good. Annoyed was better than dead. But I'd also put myself within its reach. One of its clawed feet lashed out, catching me in the side. Claws ripped through my flak armor and into the flesh beneath. I cried out, stumbling back, warm blood soaking my side. The pain was sharp and immediate. The crowd went wild. My pain was their entertainment. Bitey shook its head again, let out a wet, gurgling roar, and charged a third time. I was off balance, wounded. I swung the rebar sword in a wide, clumsy arc. It connected with the squig's flank with a dull thwack. The vibration numbed my arm, and the blade, already loose, bent at a sickening angle. The squig didn't even seem to feel it. It barreled into me, its full weight knocking me to the ground. The world became a whirl of dust, green flesh, and the overwhelming, foul-breathed darkness of its mouth descending towards my face. Instinct took over. I jammed the bent rebar crosswise into its jaws, just as they snapped shut. The metal groaned, the squig's teeth grinding against it. Acidic drool sprayed my face, burning like fire. I could smell its breath, a stench of rotten meat and digestive acids. It pushed down, its immense strength slowly forcing the impromptu bit deeper into its throat, bringing its teeth closer to my nose. This was it. I was about to be decapitated by an overgrown, angry chewing gum. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a chainsword. The orcs were on their feet, screaming, baying for the finish. The warboss leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his cold eyes. With a final, desperate surge of strength, born of pure terror, I twisted the rebar, leveraging it against the squig's jaw muscles. There was a wet tearing sound. The squig let out a choked gurgle and recoiled, shaking its head violently. The rebar sword, now a twisted piece of junk, was flung from its mouth. But I had bought myself a second, just one. As Bitey lunged again, I didn't try to dodge. I rolled towards it, under its snapping jaws, and wrapped my arms around its thick, muscular neck. It was like hugging a bag of writhing snakes. It thrashed and bucked, trying to throw me off, its claws raking at my back. I ignored the fresh waves of agony. I had one hand free. I reached down, my fingers searching in the dirt, closing around a rock. Not just a rock, a piece of jagged shrapnel, heavy and sharp. The squig managed to throw me off, sending me skidding across the ground. But as I flew, I brought the shrapnel up and around with every ounce of strength I had left. I didn't aim for its body. I aimed for its eye. The sharp point of the metal sank deep into the squig's beady black orb with a sickening pop. Bitey let out an ear-splitting shriek of pure agony, a sound so high-pitched and terrible it cut through the roar of the crowd. It stumbled, blinded on one side, thrashing wildly. I didn't wait. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the bent rebar sword from where it lay, and with a scream of my own, a raw, primal thing of rage and pain, I drove the sharpest broken end into the base of the squig's skull, right where its brain should be. The creature convulsed once, a final, violent spasm, and then collapsed into a twitching heap. The arena fell silent. I stood over the dead squig, bleeding from a dozen wounds, my body screaming in protest, covered in dirt, blood, and squig saliva. I leaned on the broken rebar, using it as a crutch, my chest heaving. The silence stretched for a long, tense moment. Then Grak's voice cut through the quiet, filled with genuine shock. He won! Daomi actually won! The arena erupted. But this time, it wasn't the bloodthirsty roar for a kill. It was a roar of approval, of stunned respect. They had expected a quick, messy death. They had been given a fight. I had survived. I looked up at the warboss. He was still on his throne, but he was no longer still. He was leaning forward, his hydraulic claw flexing slowly. He wasn't smiling, but there was a new light in his eyes, a spark of interest, a predator recognizing another predator, however small and pink. He stood up. The crowd immediately fell silent again, waiting for his judgment. He pointed his claw at me. "Bring him," he growled, his voice a low rumble that carried across the entire arena. "I want a closer look." Grak and Snasket hurried forward, but their demeanor had changed. There was less brutality in their grip, more deference. They weren't dragging a prisoner anymore. They were escorting a champion. As they led me towards the warboss's throne, the crowd of orcs parted, watching me pass. I saw it in their eyes now. Not just hunger, not just the desire for violence. I saw curiosity. I saw a flicker of something that might have been respect. I had won the fight. I had killed Bitey. But as I stood before the massive, silent warboss, feeling his gaze strip me down to my very soul, I had a terrifying realization. The easy part was over. Now the real games were about to begin. The walk to the warboss's throne felt longer than my entire time in the cage. Every step sent a fresh jolt of pain through my ravaged body. The claw wounds on my back and side burned like fire, and my muscles trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline withdrawal. But I forced myself to stand straight, to meet the gaze of the thousands of orcs staring at me. their earlier bloodlust now tempered with a buzzing, curious energy. Grak and Snazget didn't shove me this time. They flanked me, a bizarre green honor guard, their posture almost respectful. We reached the base of the dais, a mountain of scrap metal, vehicle parts, and bleached bones welded together into a platform of terrifying authority. The Warboss looked down at me, and I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass on a very sunny day. Up close, he was even more immense. His skin was a tapestry of scars, some clean and surgical, others ragged and brutal. One of his tusks was capped with crudely engraved gold. His real hand, resting on the arm of his throne, was large enough to crush my skull without effort. The hydraulic claw on his other arm twitched, emitting a soft hiss of compressed air. His eyes were the most disconcerting part, not the mindless rage of his followers, but a cold, calculating intelligence that observed, categorized, and judged. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence in the arena was absolute, a held breath waiting to be released. The only sound was the sputtering of torches and the distant, ever-present thump, thump, thump of the camp's heartbeat. Finally, he shifted, the scrap metal throne groaning in protest. So, his voice was a low grind, like continents colliding deep underground. "You're the Omi what killed Bitey. He was a good squig. Killed 23 prisoners. Fast he was." "He was also a terrible conversationalist," I rasped, wiping squig drool from my cheek. It stung. All teeth and no talk. I prefer my dinner companions with a bit more wit. A ripple of confusion went through the nearby orcs. They weren't sure if I was being brave or stupid. The Warboss, however, did something I didn't expect. A low, rumbling sound started in his chest and erupted as a short, sharp bark of laughter. It wasn't the joyous roar of the crowd. It was the laugh of a king who has just heard a particularly clever jester. "You got mouth, little pink thing," he said, the laughter dying as quickly as it came. "Most humies just scream and cry and make the place smell bad. You fight, and you talk back." He leaned forward, the shadow of his bulk falling over me. "I am Gitsnacha. I lead this WAAAGH. I decide who fights, who works, and who gets fed to dust squigs. And right now, I'm deciding what to do with you." He gestured with his claw towards my bleeding side. "You're hurt. Bad. A wound like that, a homie would be dead in an hour. But you're still standing, still talking. Your blood, it's already starting to slow." I glanced down. Gitsnatch's eyes narrowed, missing nothing. "Interesting, very interesting." He turned his head slightly. "Doc, get up here." From the crowd of knobs surrounding the throne, an orc emerged. This one was different from the others. He wasn't massively muscular, but he had a lean, wiry strength. He wore a stained leather apron over his armor, and a belt hung with an array of terrifying implements: saws, drills, pliers, and syringes filled with suspiciously colored liquids. Goggles were pushed up on his forehead, and his hands were covered in a mix of oil and dried blood. This was the camp's medic, and he looked more like a torturer. "Yeah, boss," the doc grunted, his voice a wet gurgle. "Look at this," Gitsnacha said, pointing at my side. "Look close." The doc, who I heard another orc call Gut-Wrencha, shuffled forward. He prodded the wound with a clawed finger, ignoring my hiss of pain. He leaned in, sniffing the air like a connoisseur. Flesh is stitching itself back together. See, the edges are pulling tight. No pus, no green rot. Just fixin'. Fast." He looked up at Gitsnacha, his goggle lens eyes wide with professional fascination. "Dis ain't normal, boss. Not for a humie." I'm a fast healer, I said weakly, the excuse sounding pathetic even to my own ears. Gitsnatcha ignored me, his gaze locked on Gut-Wrencha. How fast? The doc pulled out a vicious-looking hooked knife from his belt. Before I could react, he slashed it across my arm, a deep, painful cut. I cried out, clutching the new wound. Blood welled up and began to flow. Now we watch, Gut-Wrencha said, his tone clinical and detached. The orcs crowded around, their earlier curiosity now a focused scientific interest. We all watched the cut on my arm. The bleeding slowed, then stopped completely within a minute. The edges of the wound visibly drew together, the skin paling as it sealed, weaving behind a pink, tender line that was already fading. A collective, awed murmur went through the knobs. "He fixes himself," one whispered. "Like a Mekboy patching a truck," another said, "but without de Welden." Gitsnatcha's eyes gleamed with a terrifying new light. Wasn't just interest anymore, it was avarice. It was the look of a being who has just discovered a priceless, renewable resource. "Again," Gitsnatcha commanded. "Boss, wait," I started. Gut-Wrencha didn't hesitate. This time, he stabbed me in the thigh with a pointed tool. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot spike that made my leg buckle. I collapsed to one knee, gritting my teeth to keep from screaming. Again, we watched. The puncture wound sealed, the muscle tissue knitting itself back together from the inside out. The murmur from the orcs grew louder. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a miracle. This was magic. Gitsnatcha stood up from his throne, his full, terrifying height, dwarfing everyone around him. He walked down from the dais and stood over me, his shadow swallowing me whole. "You don't just heal fast, little pink thing," he rumbled, his voice thick with revelation. "You come back." He looked at Gut-Wrencha. "Doc, I got a question for you." "What's dat, boss?" Gitsnatcha smiled. It was the most frightening thing I had seen since I arrived on this planet. "If we kill him, will he come back?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My blood ran cold, colder than the metal of my cage. They were just going to make me fight. They weren't just going to wound me to study me. They were going to kill me, repeatedly, to see if it would stick. "Only one way to find out, boss." Gut-Wrencha's face split into a grin that mirrored his warboss's. Gitsnatcha nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. He raised his massive shuda, a weapon that was less a gun and more a portable artillery piece. He pointed it directly at my chest from point-blank range. "This," he announced to the silent, watching arena, "is for science." There was no bravado left in me, no clever retort. There was only the yawning, absolute certainty of what was about to happen. "Don't," I whispered, the word barely audible. Gitsnatcha pulled the trigger. The world exploded. The sound was beyond deafening. The impact didn't feel like being hit. It felt like my entire body had been disassembled at the atomic level. I was thrown backwards, a ragdoll made of broken parts, landing in a ruined heap 20 feet away. There was pain, an all-consuming universal pain that was every sensation at once. And then, nothing. The darkness was absolute. It was the void. It was the quiet place between jokes. It was the great cosmic offstage where I waited while the stage hands reset the scene. Then, a sensation like a rope snapping taut, a violent, wrenching pull. The universe remembered I was supposed to be here. Reality, offended by my absence, slammed me back into my body. I gasped, a raw, ragged sound that tore at my newly formed throat and lungs. I was lying on the arena floor. My body was whole. My clothes were still torn and bloody, but the wounds were gone. The only evidence of my death was the memory of the pain and the stunned, reverent silence of 10,000 orcs. I was alive. Gitsnatcha slowly lowered his smoking shuta. He looked from the spot where I'd been standing to where I now lay, resurrected and gasping. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then, Grak, his voice filled with a kind of religious awe, broke it. He came back. He was dead. I saw him. Bits everywhere. And he just came back. The spell was broken. The arena erupted into the loudest, most chaotic, most joyous uproar I had ever heard. It wasn't the roar for a kill. It was the roar for a miracle. Orcs were jumping up and down, hugging each other, firing their weapons into the air in celebration. Gitsnatcha walked over to me and looked down. The avarice in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Something like reverence. Something like pure, unadulterated greed. He reached down and, with surprising gentleness, helped me to my feet. My legs were weak, my mind reeling from the trauma of death and rebirth. "Boys!" Gitsnatcha bellowed, his voice cutting through the celebration. The crowd fell silent once more, hanging on his every word. "We thought we just had a tough hoonie, but we was wrong." He put a massive hand on my shoulder. It felt like being anchored by a mountain. "We got ourselves the best toy in the whole galaxy," he roared, and the crowd roared with him. "A hummy we can kill, over and over and over again." The sound was deafening. It was approval. It was acceptance. It was my damnation. I looked out at the sea of green, grinning faces. I saw Grak and Snazgit cheering louder than anyone. I saw Gutwrencha already make. I had survived the squig. I had survived a point-blank shoot-a-blast. But as Gitsnatcha led me, his new favorite toy, away from the arena and towards a future of endless, repetitive death, I knew with a soul-deep certainty that I had never been in more danger in my entire, very long life. The cage had been a prison. This was hell, and I had just been given a lifetime membership. I was not returned to the general population cages. That honor, it seemed, was beneath me now. My new accommodations were a grim parody of an upgrade. A reinforced metal cage within a larger, cavernous structure that served as Gutwrencha's laboratory, hospital, and charnel house. It was located near the Mekboyz workshops, the air thick with the smells of ozone, welding fumes, and the distinct coppery scent of old blood. The cage itself was sturdier, the bars thicker, the lock more complex. It was less about keeping me in and more about keeping the overly enthusiastic orc populace out. I was no longer just a prisoner. I was a prized specimen, and Gitsnatcha wanted me preserved. The laboratory was a vision of nightmare logic. Workbenches were littered with tools that would give an inquisitor pause. Bone saws with teeth like jagged diamonds, clamps designed to hold struggling limbs, glass vats filled with murky fluids where unidentifiable organs slowly pulsed. One wall was covered in hooks from which hung various skeletal remains, human, orc, and things I couldn't identify. In the corner, a generator of some kind chugged and smoked, powering a flickering bank of lights, and what looked like a primitive centrifuge made from a repurposed wheel hub. This was where the orcish pursuit of science, unburdened by ethics, morality, or basic common sense, was conducted, and I was its new primary subject. Gutwrencha was ecstatic. He bustled around the lab, organizing his tools and humming a tuneless, guttural song. Grak and Snazgit had been reassigned as my permanent guards, a duty they now treated with the solemnity of paladins guarding a holy relic. "The boss says you're not to be damaged by anyone but him or me," Grek explained, his metal jaw clicking with importance. "Says you're a strategic resource." "How flattering," I muttered, sitting on the bare floor of my new cage. The trauma of being killed and reborn was a fresh psychic wound. My body was whole, but my mind felt frayed. There was a phantom echo of the shoot-a-blast, a memory of dissolution that lingered at the edge of my consciousness. "Right, let's get started," Gut-Wrencher announced, pulling on a pair of heavily stained gloves. He unlocked my cage door. "We got a lot to test. Gotta be proper scientific about this." "Scientific?" I asked, my voice hollow. "You're going to kill me in different ways to see what happens? That's not science. That's just serial murder with better record-keeping." "Exactly," Gut-Wrencher said, missing the sarcasm entirely. "Now, hold still. This first one is to establish a baseline." He didn't ask for consent. He simply raised a heavy, blunt instrument, it looked like a piston from a vehicle engine, and brought it down on my left leg with brutal force. The sound of my femur snapping was like a gunshot in the confined space. I screamed, the pain blinding and absolute. I collapsed, clutching my leg, which was now bent at a horrifying angle. Gut-Wrencher didn't even look at me. He was watching a crude sand timer he'd flipped over. Grek and Snazgit peered through the bars, their expressions a mixture of fascination and mild boredom. Note, blunt trauma to limb, compound fracture observed. Gut-Wrencher muttered to himself, scratching on a piece of slate with a piece of chalk. Healing initiation time, now. I could feel it. The bone fragments were shifting, pulling themselves back into alignment. The torn muscle and severed blood vessels were weaving themselves back together. It was an intensely uncomfortable, deeply invasive sensation, like millions of ants working under my skin. Within 5 minutes, the bone was whole, the muscle intact. The pain faded to a deep, throbbing ache, which then subsided entirely. Gut-Wrencher grunted, making another note. "Good. Fast. Very fast. Now for laceration." He produced a jagged, rusty knife. Before I could even protest, he dragged it across my chest, slicing deep. The pain was sharp and searing. Blood poured out, soaking my already filthy tunic. Again, the sand timer. Again, the intense internal itching as my flesh stitched itself closed. The wound was gone in under 3 minutes. "Fascinating," Gut-Wrencher murmured. "The body knows what to do. It just does it. No thinking, no nothing." He looked at me, his head cocked. "How does it know?" I don't know," I gasped, still recovering. "It just does." Unhelpful. He turned to his workbench. "Now for the big one. The boss already tested ballistic trauma, but we gotta be thorough. We gotta test separation." He picked up a large, vicious-looking cleaver. My blood ran cold. "Wait," I said, scrambling back in the cage until I hit the R's. "Wait, no, you don't have to do this. We can talk about this." "Talking ain't science," Gut-Wrencher said calmly. He gestured to Grek. "Hold him." Grek entered the cage, his massive hands pinning my arms to my sides with effortless strength. I struggled, but it was like fighting a landslide. "Snazgit," Gut-Wrencher said. "Get the bucket, for depart." Snazgit scurried off and returned with a rusty metal bucket, which he placed strategically nearby. "No! Stop!" I yelled, true primal terror seizing me. This was different. This was a violation on a fundamental level. Gut-Wrencher ignored me. He raised the cleaver. Test subject, Pinky. Experiment, limb severation and observation of regenerative capabilities. Hypothesis, he will grow a new one. The cleaver came down. There was a moment of incredible, shattering pain, and then a bizarre, weightless sensation. I looked down. My left hand was gone, severed at the wrist. Blood fountained from the stump. Snazgit caught the disembodied hand in the bucket with a pleased grunt. The pain was beyond anything I had ever felt. It was a white-hot void of agony centered on my wrist. I screamed until my throat was raw, my vision swimming. Grak held me fast, his expression unreadable. Gut-wrencher was already at work, not on me, but on my severed hand. He picked it up from the bucket and placed it on a bench. Note: subject remains conscious and vocal post-severation. Regeneration appears to be initiating at the stump site, not the severed limb. I watched, through a haze of pain and horror, as the bleeding from my wrist slowed. The skin and muscle at the end of my arm began to bubble. It was a grotesque, rapid process. A nub of bone extended, followed by strands of muscle weaving around it, then nerves and blood vessels, all sheathed in a layer of pale, new skin. Within 10 minutes, I had a new, small, pink, and perfectly formed hand. It was tender and weak, but it was there. Meanwhile, the hand on the bench lay still, lifeless, just meat. Confirmed, Gut-wrencher said, making a note. Regeneration is centralized to the main body mass. Severed parts do not regenerate independently. He seemed almost disappointed. He poked my new hand with a probe. Full functionality test will require time, but structural integrity appears nominal. He then turned his attention back to the bench. Now, what to do with the old one? He looked at me, then at the hand, then at a caged squig in the corner that was hopping up and down excitedly. A slow smile spread across his face. Secondary experiment. Dietary effects. He threw my severed hand into the squig's cage. The creature pounced on it, and the sound of crunching bone and rending flesh filled the lab. I vomited. There was nothing in my stomach but bile, but I vomited anyway, the convulsions racking my newly whole body. I had just watched a monster eat my own hand. The psychological horror of it was a different kind of wound, one my healing factor couldn't touch. Gut-wrencher made another note. Subject experienced a stress reaction. Possible psychological component to healing? More study needed. He was about to continue, his eyes roaming over me for the next test site, when a massive shadow fell across the entrance to the lab. Gitsnatcha ducked his head and stepped inside. "Doc," the Warboss rumbled. "Report." "Boss," Gut-wrencher said, snapping to attention. "Progress is excellent. We have confirmed limb regeneration. Centralized. Fast. We've tested blood force, laceration, and severation. All successful. Subject is remarkably durable." Gitsnatcha looked at me, curled in a ball on the floor of my cage, covered in sweat, blood, and vomit, cradling my new tiny hand. His gaze was not one of pity, but of satisfaction, like a farmer inspecting a prize bull. "Good," Gitsnatcha said. "But I ain't just interested in how he fixes him. I'm interested in why. And I'm interested in how we can use it." He walked over to my cage and squatted down, his immense size still intimidating even at my level. "Listen, pink thing, you're mine now. You understand? You will die when I say you die. You will live when I say you live. Your pain is my entertainment. Your body is my laboratory." He stood up and turned to Gut-wrencher. "No more killing in for fun. From now on, every death has a purpose. You work with Gamex. You work with the Weird Boys. You figure out how E works, and you find a way to make it work for us." He left the lab, leaving me with the horrifying implication of his words. They weren't just going to torture me for amusement. They were going to try and reverse engineer my curse. They were going to try and weaponize my immortality. As he approached the cage, syringe in hand, I closed my eyes. The physical pain I could endure. The dying I could survive. But the thought of my curse, the thing that had isolated me my entire life, being inflicted upon this galaxy, That was a horror from which there might be no coming back. The spore rot was a special kind of agony. It wasn't the sharp, clean cane of a blade or the shattering impact of a bullet. This was a slow, creeping, internal corruption. Gut-wrench's glowing green injection sent tendrils of fire through my veins, a biological invasion that made my cells shriek in protest. My skin took on a sickly phosphorescent hue, and I could feel something fungal and alien trying to take root in my lungs. For hours, I convulsed on the floor of my cage, coughing up thick, green phlegm, my body waging a frantic, invisible war against the infection. My healing factor fought back with a terrifying, blind fury. It was like watching two armies clash in a microscopic civil war. The rot would advance, consuming tissue, and my white blood cells, supercharged by the divine cancer that cursed and blessed me, would counterattack, burning out the infection with a fever so intense the bars of my cage grew warm to the touch. The green glow in my skin would flare, then recede, flare, and recede, like a ghastly lighthouse signaling my suffering. Grack and Snazget watched the process with a detached, professional interest, occasionally placing bets on whether I'd go squig or pop like a Zoggen blister. I give him another hour before his head explodes, Vrack mused, his metal jaw clicking. Nah. Look, the green is fadin', Snazget argued. I pukes up a new little squig and den gets better. 10 teeth on it. In the end, Snazget was closer to the truth. After what felt like an eternity, the fever broke in a torrent of sweat that steamed in the cool air of the lab. I lay spent and trembling, my body purged of the Xenos plague, but my spirit felt scoured raw. I had survived, but each of these tests was chipping away at something fundamental inside me. I was becoming a collection of traumatic memories held together by unkillable flesh. It was during this recovery, as I lay gasping on the floor, that Mekboyz Bosspark visited the lab. He was one of the head mechs, a hulking orc whose hands were stained permanently with grease, and whose head was a mass of crudely implanted cybernetics that whirred and clicked as he thought. One of his eyes was a glowing red laser scanner, and it swept over me from head to toe with a piercing zip-zit sound. Doc, Bosspark grunted, his voice a grating bass rumble. Da boss says you're wasting time poking him with pointy things. Gut-wrencher looked up from his notes, offended. This is foundational research. I am establishing the parameters of his resilience. You're establishing that he's hard to break, Bosspark retorted, waving a wrench the size of my leg dismissively. We know that. What we don't know is how. And for that, you need a mech's perspective. He stomped over to my cage and peered in, his scanner eye whirring as it focused on my newly regenerated, still pink hand. See? Look at that. It's perfect. Too perfect. It ain't natural. It's a miracle, Gut-wrencher said with something akin to religious fervor. It's a machine, Bosspark countered. A biological machine, and every machine has a power source. Every machine has a blueprint. You keep looking at the squishy bits, Doc? You need to look at the idea of him. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, intrigued despite my exhaustion. The idea of me? Bosspark turned his scanner eye on me. Yeah, what are you, Umi, in your head? When you close your eyes, do you think you're unkillable? It was a startlingly philosophical question from a being who probably communicated with inanimate objects by hitting them with a hammer. I come back. I've done it enough times. But do you believe it? Bosspark pressed, his tone intense. When the boss pointed his shooter at you, did you know you'd get back up, or did you just hope? I thought back to that moment, the cold certainty of the void staring me in the face. I knew, I said softly. I was terrified, but I knew. Boss Park slapped his thigh with a loud clang. See? That's it, right there. You believed it would work, so it did. Gut-Wrencher looked confused. But his body, it eels. We've seen it. His body eels because his Ed tells it to, Boss Park exclaimed, getting more animated. It's like a self-repairing gubbin. If you believe a red paint job makes a truck go faster, it does, because the WAAAGH makes it so. It's a machine, Boss Park countered. A biological machine. And every machine has a power source. Every machine has a blueprint. You keep looking at the squishy bits, Doc. You need to look at the idea of him. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, intrigued despite my exhaustion. So, what are you saying? I asked, my voice hoarse. I'm saying we've been going about this all wrong, Boss Park said, turning to Gut-Wrencher. Stop cutting him up. Start testing his head. Gut-Wrencher's eyes lit up with a new, disturbing understanding. A psychological component, of course. We must break his spirit. If he stops believing, maybe he stops coming back. No, you zogging idiot, Boss Park roared, smacking the Doc on the back of the head with his wrench. We don't want to break it. We want to harness it. He turned back to me, a scheming glint in his organic eye. Pinky, we're going to do a new experiment, a mech experiment. I felt a fresh wave of dread. A mech experiment sounded infinitely worse than a Doc experiment. At least the Doc was interested in biology. What kind of experiment? I asked warily. Boss Park grinned, revealing a mouth full of filed-down metallic teeth. We're going to see if you can believe ardor. Chapter 7. The Belief Engine. Boss Park's laboratory made Gut-Wrencher's look like a sterile Medicaid bay. It was a cathedral of controlled chaos, a vast, echoing space filled with half-built vehicles, sparking energy conduits, and the constant deafening noise of hammers, welding torches, and things exploding prematurely. I was led to a cleared space in the center, where a bizarre contraption sat humming with latent energy. It looked like the love child of an electric chair and an engine block. A mess of wires, copper coils, and glowing vacuum tubes all bolted to a heavy metal throne. What is it? Snazgit asked, his lazy eye wandering over the machine with awe. It's a WAAAGH field focusing apparatus, Boss Park announced proudly, patting a protruding tube that sparked dangerously. Or it will be once I finish the kinks. He gestured to the throne. Strap him in. Now, wait a minute, I said, backing away. Grapp's firm hand on my shoulder stopped my retreat. What exactly is this supposed to do? It's gonna give you a belief boost, Boss Park explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. This is insane. Even by my standards, this was a new pinnacle of reckless, life-endangering insanity. They were going to hook me up to an untested Ork psychic amplifier to see if they could supercharge my healing factor. There was no arguing. Grack and Snazgit manhandled me into the cold metal throne, clamping heavy bands over my wrists, ankles, and forehead. The metal was icy against my skin. I could feel a low, subsonic thrum coming from the machine, a vibration that seemed to resonate with my very bones. Right, Boss Park said, rubbing his hands together. Let's start small. Just a little bit of WAAAGH to get the feel of it. He nodded to a gaggle of apprentice mechs standing by a large lever. Pump it. An orc threw the lever. The machine whined, the pitch rising rapidly from a hum to a shriek. The capacitors glowed brighter, and arcs of raw, green-tinged energy leapt from the coils to the nodes attached to my restraints. A jolt, unlike anything I have ever experienced, slammed into me. It wasn't electricity. It was pure, undiluted psychic force. It was the collective, simplistic, aggressive belief of every orc in the camp. The belief that red dings go faster, that more Daka is always better. It was a tsunami of green thought crashing directly into my brain. I screamed, but no sound came out. My vision turned a blazing, painful emerald green. I could feel the WAAAGH energy trying to rewrite me, to overwrite my own sense of self with the orcish imperative. And in that maelstrom, something bizarre happened. My healing factor didn't just activate, it erupted. The lingering tenderness in my new hand vanished instantly. An old scar on my shoulder from a Necron Gauss flare faded away as if it had never been there. I felt stronger, more vital, more real than I ever had before. The orc belief in invincibility was supercharging my own, but it came at a cost. The psychic feedback was agonizing. My mind, a chaotic place at the best of times, was not meant to process the raw, unfiltered consciousness of an entire species. I felt my own memories blurring, my personality starting to fray at the edges. A part of me wanted to shout, "Wah!" A part of me looked at Grek and felt a surge of simple, uncomplicated camaraderie. "Increase the flow," Boss Park bellowed over the din, his scanner eye whirring madly as he observed me. "He's taken it. Look, the old scar is gone. It's working." The apprentice mechs threw more levers. The shriek of the machine became a deafening roar. The green energy surrounding me solidified, becoming a crackling cocoon. The pressure in my head was immense, a building agony that threatened to vaporize my sanity. "More! Give 'em more!" Boss Park screamed, caught up in the ecstasy of discovery. This was it. This was how I would truly die. Not through physical destruction, but through psychic overwriting. I would become an orc in a human body, a mindless, laughing weapon. My consciousness dissolved in the green tide. I had to fight back. I had to assert my own belief, not in the orc way, but in the Wade Wilson way. I focused through the pain, through the alien thoughts battering at my mind. I dug down, past the fear, past the trauma, to the one unshakable core of my being, my glorious, magnificent, and utterly unkillable self. I am Wade Wilson. I am the merc with a mouth. I have died more times than I can count. I have annoyed gods and daemons alike. I break the fourth wall for fun. I am a walking, talking cosmic joke, and the punchline is that I always get back up. I believe that. I screamed it, not with my voice, but with my soul. I projected my own identity, my own personal reality, against the crushing weight of the WAAAGH. The machine shuddered. The green energy flared, then flickered. A feedback wave tinted not with green, but with a shimmering, meta-aware pinkish silver erupted from my body and shot back through the coils. The capacitors, unable to handle the contradictory psychic forces, overloaded. The explosion was tremendous. The belief engine blew apart in a shower of shrapnel, molten metal, and discharged psychic energy. The concussion threw Boss Park, Gut-Wrencha, and my guards off their feet. Apprentice mechs were sent flying. The entire workshop shook, and several half-built vehicles collapsed into piles of scrap. When the smut cleared, I was still sitting in the throne, which was now a mangled wreck. The restraints had been blown clean off. I was covered in soot, my clothes smoldering, but I was unharmed. More than unharmed, I felt clear. The psychic static was gone. The orcish impulses had vanished. My mind was my own again. I stood up, my legs steady. I looked at my hands. They were whole, strong. My healing factor had not just been supercharged, it had been purified. Boss Park pulled himself out from under a pile of wiring, his face a mask of soot and awe. He wasn't looking at the destroyed machine. He was looking at me. You broke it, he whispered, his voice full of reverence. You broke the WAAAGH. Brack and Snazget stared at me as if I had just ascended to godhood. I took a deep, clean breath. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They had tried to break me, to remake me, to use me, and in doing so, they had shown me something. They had shown me that my will, my own stubborn, stupid, magnificent belief in myself, was a power they could not truly control. I looked at the stunned orcs around me, at the wreckage of their machine, and I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. You wanted to see what happens when I believe harder, I said, my voice calm and steady. You just did. The balance of power in this green hell had just shifted. I was no longer just a toy. I was a variable they hadn't accounted for, and I was just beginning to understand the rules of my own game. Boss Park's laboratory made gut wrenches look like a sterile Medicaid bay. It was a cathedral of controlled chaos, a vast, echoing space filled with half-built vehicles, sparking energy conduits, and the constant deafening noise of hammers, welding torches, and things exploding prematurely. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and orc, a pungent combination of sweat, fungus, and ambition. I was led to a cleared space in the center, where a bizarre contraption sat humming with latent energy. It looked like the love child of an electric chair and an engine block, a mess of wires, copper coils, and glowing vacuum tubes all bolted to a heavy metal throne. Wires snaked from it to a bank of capacitors that crackled with barely contained lightning. "What is it?" Snazget asked, his lazy eye wandering over the machine with awe. "It's a WAAAGH field focusing apparatus," Boss Park announced proudly, patting a protruding tube that sparked dangerously. "Or it will be once I finish the kinks. It's meant to channel Du Bois' belief into a mech project, make it work better. But I think we can use it on our pink friend here." He gestured to the throne. "Strap him in." "Now, wait a minute," I said, backing away. Grack's firm hand on my shoulder stopped my retreat. "What exactly is this supposed to do?" "It's going to give you a belief boost," Boss Park explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "If your own ed power is what keeps you going, then more ed power should make you even harder to kill. Maybe you'll heal faster. Maybe you will feel the pain. Maybe you'll grow an extra arm. Who knows? It's science." This was insane. Even by my standards, this was a new pinnacle of reckless, life-endangering insanity. They were going to hook me up to an untested orc psychic amplifier to see if they could supercharge my healing factor. "This is a terrible idea," I stated flatly. "You could unravel my very molecular structure. You could turn me inside out. You could fuse my consciousness with that of a nearby squig." "Ooh, that last one sounds interesting," Gut-Wrencher muttered, already taking notes. There was no arguing. Grack and Snazget manhandled me into the cold metal throne, clamping heavy bands over my wrists, ankles, and forehead. The metal was icy against my skin. I could feel a low subsonic thrum coming from the machine, a vibration that seemed to resonate with my very bones. "Right," Boss Park said, rubbing his hands together. "Let's start small. Just a little bit of WAAAGH to get the feel of it." He nodded to a gaggle of apprentice mechs standing by a large lever. "Pump it!" An orc threw the lever. The machine whined, the pitch rising rapidly from a hum to a shriek. The capacitors glowed brighter, and arcs of raw, green-tinged energy leapt from the coils to the nodes attached to my restraints. A jolt, unlike anything I have ever experienced, slammed into me. It wasn't electricity. It was pure, undiluted, psychic force. It was the collective, simplistic, aggressive belief of every orc in the camp. The belief that red things go faster, that more DACA is always better, that fighting is the highest purpose of life. It was a tsunami of green thought, crashing directly into my brain. I screamed, but no sound came out. My vision turned a blazing, painful emerald green. I could feel the WAAAGH energy trying to rewrite me, to overwrite my own sense of self with the orcish imperative. It was trying to make me believe I was an orc, that violence was joy and pain a fleeting inconvenience. And in that maelstrom, something bizarre happened. My healing factor didn't just activate. It erupted. The lingering tenderness in my new hand vanished instantly. An old scar on my shoulder from a Necron Gauss flare faded away as if it had never been there. I felt stronger, more vital, more real than I ever had before. The orc belief in invincibility was supercharging my own. But it came at a cost. The psychic feedback was agonizing. My mind, a chaotic place at the best of times, was not meant to process the raw, unfiltered consciousness of an entire species. I felt my own memories blurring, my personality fraying at the edges. A part of me wanted to shout, "WAAAGH!" A part of me looked at Grok and felt a surge of simple, uncomplicated camaraderie. "Increase the flow," Boss Park bellowed over the din, his scanner eye whirring madly as he observed me. "He's taking it. Look, the old scar is gone. It's working." The apprentice mechs threw more levers. The shriek of the machine became a deafening roar. The green energy surrounding me solidified, becoming a crackling cocoon. The pressure in my head was immense, a building agony that threatened to vaporize my sanity. "More! Give 'em more!" Boss Park screamed, caught up in the ecstasy of discovery. This was it. This was how I would truly die. Not through physical destruction, but through psychic overwriting. I would become an orc in a human body, a mindless, laughing weapon, my consciousness dissolved in the green tide. I had to fight back. I had to assert my own belief, not in the orc way, but in the Wade Wilson way. I focused through the pain, through the alien thoughts battering at my mind. I dug down, past the fear, past the trauma, to the one unshakable core of my being, my glorious, magnificent, and utterly unkillable self. I am Wade Wilson. I am the merc with a mouth. I have died more times than I can count. I have annoyed gods and daemons alike. I break the fourth wall for fun. I am a walking, talking cosmic joke, and the punchline is that I always get back up. I believe that. I screamed it not with my voice, but with my soul. I projected my own identity, my own personal reality against the crushing weight of the WAAAGH. The machine shuddered. The green energy flared, then flickered. A feedback wave tinted not with green, but with a shimmering, meta-aware pinkish silver erupted from my body and shot back through the coils. The capacitors, unable to handle the contradictory psychic forces, overloaded. The explosion was tremendous. The belief engine blew apart in a shower of shrapnel, molten metal, and discharged psychic energy. The concussion threw Boss Park, Gut-Wrencher, and my guards off their feet. Apprentice mechs were sent flying. The entire workshop shook, and several half-built vehicles collapsed into piles of scrap. When the smoke cleared, I was still sitting in the throne, which was now a mangled wreck. The restraints had been blown clean off. I was covered in soot, my clothes were smoldering, but I was unharmed. More than unharmed. I felt clear. The psychic static was gone. The orcish impulses had vanished. My mind was my own again. I stood up, my legs steady. I looked at my hands. They were whole, strong. My healing factor had not just been supercharged, it had been purified. For the first time since my capture, I felt no lingering pain, no phantom aches from old wounds. Boss Park pulled himself out from under a pile of wiring, his face a mask of soot and awe. He wasn't looking at the destroyed machine. He was looking at me. "You broke it," he whispered, his voice full of reverence. "You broke the WAAAGH." Grak and Snazget stared at me as if I had just ascended to godhood. I took a deep, clean breath. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They had tried to break me, to remake me, to use me, and in doing so, they had shown me something. They had shown me that my will, my own stubborn, stupid, magnificent belief in myself, was a power they could not truly control. I looked at the stunned orcs around me, at the wreckage of their machine, and I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "You wanted to see what happens when I believe harder?" I said, my voice calm and steady. "You just did." The balance of power in this green hell had just shifted. I was no longer just a toy. I was a variable they hadn't accounted for, and I was just beginning to understand the rules of my own game. The fallout from the destruction of the WAAAGH field apparatus was immediate and profound. The psychic backlash had been felt across the entire camp, a silent, shrieking wave that made every orc pause, mid-fight, mid-shout, mid-whatever they were doing. For a single, unified moment, the collective belief that held their ramshackle civilization together had stuttered. A mech's welding torch flickered and died. A vehicle's engine coughed and stalled. A shooter fired at that exact instant inexplicably jammed. In Boss Park's workshop, the silence was thick with the smell of ozone and stunned disbelief. Grak and Snazget looked at me not as a prisoner or a toy, but as something other. Something that had just flexed a muscle they didn't know I possessed. Gut-Wrenchaw was frantically checking his own limbs, as if afraid my psychic backlash had somehow unhealed his old scars. But it was Boss Park's reaction that was most telling. He wasn't angry about his destroyed machine. He was ecstatic. He scrambled over the smoldering wreckage, his scanner eye whirring, ignoring the minor burns on his arms. "Incredible," he bellowed, voice cracking with excitement. "You didn't just resist it. You fought it. You ate it back with your own pink energy. I've never seen anything like it. It's not just healing, it's reality healing. You fix yourself by believing the world as to obey." He was closer to the truth than he knew. The experiment had been a horrific violation, but also a brutal education. My healing factor wasn't just biological. It was psychosomatic, metaphysical, a feedback loop between my body and my unshakable, cynical, core-deep conviction that I was the protagonist of this story, and the story wasn't over. The Ork WAAAGH field, a reality-warping engine of collective will, tried to overwrite my narrative with its own. I told it, in no uncertain terms, to go screw itself. This changed everything. Fear became a manageable currency. Pain, a temporary state. The realization that my own mind was the ultimate weapon, that was power. This newfound understanding, however, came with a price. The psychic shockwave had drawn attention, the kind of attention I really, really didn't want. Later that day, as I was being escorted back to my cage in Gut-Wrench's lab, now viewed as the only secure enough location for a being of my volatility, a new orc arrived. He was lean, gaunt, without the heavy, crude weaponry of the boys. He was draped in ragged, fetish-covered robes, animal skulls and crackling energy crystals dangled from his belt. His eyes glowed with a faint, sickly green light, and the air around him hummed with a power similar yet fundamentally different from the general WAAAGH energy. It was sharper, more focused, more unstable. This was a weird boy, a psychic conduit for the orc race, a living lightning rod for the chaotic energies of the WAAAGH. He stopped in front of my cage, and Grak and Snazget instinctively stepped back, bravado replaced by superstitious wariness. The weird boy's name I learned with Zogwart. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated hunger. "So," Zogwart hissed, voice a dry rustle that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You are the ripple in the great green, the splinter in the WAAAGH's eye." He didn't move, but I felt a pressure build inside my skull. Not the brute force assault of the belief engine, but a subtler, more insidious probe, a psychic tendril slithering into my mind, seeking the source of the pink energy Boss Park raved about. I replied, "I'm just a guy who's hard to kill, trying to keep my mental shields up. They were makeshift, born of desperation and meta-awareness, not training." Zogwart whispered, "You are a lie, a walking, talking lie in the face of reality. The universe says you should be dead. Your flesh says otherwise. This offends the WAAAGH." The pressure increased. He poked at my memories, flashes of past deaths, electrocution, dismemberment, being eaten by a giant mutant, tasting each dissolution. "Your pain is loud," he murmured, thin green spittle leaking from his mouth. "So many endings, but the story? It does not end. It rewinds, it cheats." He sharpened his psychic presence like a dagger. "How does it cheat? What is the mechanism of this heresy against entropy?" I gritted my teeth, pushing back, focusing on the most annoying song I knew, the theme to a 21st century cartoon about a talking sponge, and blasted it mentally at him. Zogwart flinched, head snapping back as if struck. The psychic pressure vanished briefly. He looked confused and furious. What was that? That meaningless noise?" I replied, "That's my secret, Cap. I'm always annoying." He snarled, launching a psychic blast meant to turn my brain to soup. I braced for darkness. But the blast hit the shimmering, meta-aware pinkish-silver energy at the core of my consciousness, the place where my belief in immortality resides. It refracted, splintering off me, striking the lab walls. A cabinet of gut-wrenches tools melted into slag. A caged grot across the room suddenly started tap-dancing and singing a show tune in perfect high Gothic before its head exploded. Zogwart stared, jaw slack. You are not a creature of the WAAAGH," he breathed, revulsion and fascination mixing. "You are an infection, a reality virus. Your existence is a glitch." He stepped back, eyes wide. The Warboss sees a toy. The mech sees a machine. The doc sees a specimen. But I see the truth. You are a danger to the Great Green. He turned and swept out of the lab, robes swirling, oppressive energy trailing. The threat lingered like poison. Grak let out a breath he'd been holding. "Zobwart," he muttered, shaking his head. Spooky." Smazgid just nodded vigorously, lazy eye twitching. I sank to the floor of my cage, mentally exhausted. I had survived, but I'd made a powerful, terrifying enemy. Git Snatcha wanted to use me. Boss Park wanted to understand me. Gut Wrencho wanted to take me apart. Zogwart saw me for what I truly am. A cosmic anomaly. In a universe governed by the harsh, unyielding logic of the warp and the WAAAGH, an anomaly is something to be purged. The walls of my cage felt thinner than ever. I was no longer just fighting for survival. I was fighting for my very right to exist. The incident with Zogwart changed the dynamics of my captivity yet again. I was no longer just the unkillable Humie. I was the spooky Humie that even the weird boys couldn't crack. A new kind of respect, tinged with fear, was afforded to me. My food slop contained slightly fewer identifiable bodily fluids. Grack and Snazgit stopped prodding me with sticks entirely. I was becoming a legend, and legends are handled with care. A day after Zogwart's visit, I was summoned to Getsnatch's throne room. It wasn't the open-air arena dais, but an actual enclosed structure deep within the camp. A vast hangar built around the skeletal remains of an Imperial Titan, its gutted carcass serving as the Warboss's inner sanctum. The head of the God Machine formed his personal chamber, its hollowed-out visor looking out over the camp like a dead king surveying his domain. I was led inside by a full honor guard of knobs, their expressions grim and professional. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil, ozone, and raw power. Gitsnatcha sat on a throne forged from the Titan's reactor casing, his hydraulic claw resting on one arm. Bosspark, Gutwrencha, and Zogwart were there, standing in a semicircle before him. It was a council of war, and I was the topic on the agenda. "Pinky," Gitsnatcha rumbled, his voice echoing in the metallic cavern. "You've been causing a stir." "I have a talent for disruption," I replied, keeping my voice level. "It's on my resume. ... Bosspark says you broke his best machine with your head," Gitsnatcha continued, gesturing to the Mekboy. "Gutwrencha says you're the toughest thing he's ever seen, and Zogwart here," he paused, his cold eyes shifting to the weird boy, "says you're a reality virus that needs putting down." Zogwart's glowing eyes narrowed, but he remained silent. "So," Gitsnatcha said, leaning forward, "I got a problem. I got my smartest boys telling me two different things. One says you're a weapon, the other says you're a disease, and I'm the Warboss. It's my job to decide which one you are." He stood up, his immense bulk dwarfing everyone in the room. He walked over to me, stopping so close I could see the individual battle honors scratched into his armor. "I don't care about the how or the why," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. "I care about the WAAAGH. We're gearing up for a proper fight, a big one, not this skirmishing with the local humies, a real WAAAGH against a foe worth fighting, and for that, I need every advantage." He began to pace, his footsteps ringing on the metal floor. "An Umi that can't die? That's a powerful symbol. Imagine it. My boys charging into battle, seeing one of you, a puny pink thing, walking through the enemy's biggest guns, getting blown apart and just getting back up, laughing. It would make him believe they're unstoppable. It would make the WAAAGH stronger than it's ever been." I saw his plan now. It was brilliant in its brutal simplicity. I wasn't to be a soldier. I was to be a mascot. A living, breathing, dying, and coming back good luck charm. My suffering would be a catalyst for their victory. "And you," Gitsnatcha said, stopping his pacing and pointing his claw at me. "You get a choice. The first choice any Omi has ever gotten in my camp." That got my attention. "A choice?" "Option 1, he said, holding up one thick finger. "You cooperate. You fight in the front lines of my WAAAGH. You die as many times as it takes to inspire my boys to victory. In return, you get better food, your own hut, maybe even a little freedom within the camp. You become an honorary part of the WAAAGH, not an orc, but adjacent." "And option 2, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Gitsnatch's face hardened. "Option 2 is Zogwart's option. We stop trying to understand you. We stop trying to use you. We just focus on making you dead. Not for a minute, not for an hour, but forever. Zogwart thinks he can do it. He thinks he can find a way to unravel your glitch, and send you to the great beyond for good. And he's willing to spend every ounce of his power and every other boy in this camp to do it. Zogwart smiled, a thin, predatory expression. The Great Green will not be infected. I will scour your unnatural presence from reality itself, pink thing. It may take time, it may take great sacrifice, but it will be done. So that was it. A partnership in perpetual murder or a focused, psychic war of annihilation. I looked at the four of them. The calculating warboss, the fascinated mech, the obsessive doc, and the puritanical weird boy. I was outmatched. I was surrounded. My back was against the wall. And then I heard it, a voice. Not in my ears, but in my mind. A tiny, whispering narrative voice that was entirely my own. Well, this is a fine mess you've gotten yourself into, isn't it? The big green guy has a point. Being a mascot beats being a stain on reality. But then again, playing along means signing up for an eternity of being the opening act for a green tidal wave. On the other hand, pissing off the glowing-eyed wizard means a fate worse than death, which, for you, is really saying something. So what's it going to be, Wade? The slow, ceremonial grind of being a good luck charm, or the fast, existential horror of being unmade? I looked at Gitsnatcha. I looked at Zogwart. A slow smile spread across my face. You know, I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room, this is a much more interesting dilemma than fight the squig or get shot. I appreciate the upgrade. Gitsnatcha's eyes narrowed. Your answer? I'll need to see the contract, I said, and I'll want to negotiate the benefits package. How many deaths per week are we talking? Is there a dental plan? What about paid time off? I'll need at least 1 day a week where you don't kill me, just for my mental health. There was a long, stunned silence. Boss Park looked confused. Gutwrencher looked offended. Zogwart looked utterly furious. But Gitsnatcha did that rare, terrifying thing again. He laughed. It started as a low rumble and built into a full-bellied roar that shook dust from the ceiling of the Titan's skull. He laughed until tears streamed from his eyes. You, he bellowed, pointing his claw at me. You have got Zoggin metal balls, you pink git. Dental plan. He wiped his eyes, his laughter subsiding into sharp chuckles. All right, fine. You want a deal? Here's the deal. You fight in my WAAAGH. You die when and ow I say. In return, you get to run of the camp. You can talk to the mechs. You can bother the doc. You can even try and avoid Zogwart. You'll be under watch, always, but you won't be in a cage. It was more than I could have hoped for. It was a foot in the door, a chance to learn, to plan, to find a way out of this mess that didn't involve eternal servitude or cosmic erasure. I looked at Zogwart, whose face was a mask of pure, incandescent rage. My agreement was a rejection of his solution. I had chosen the Warboss over him. I accept your proposition, I said to Gitsnatcha. Good, the Warboss said, his laughter gone, his expression once again that of a ruthless commander. Da WAAAGH moves in 2 days. Be ready. He turned to Zogwart. He's mine to use for now, weird boy. Leave him be. Zogwart didn't say a word. He just gave me one last venomous look that promised this was not over, and swept from the room. I had bought myself time. I had traded my cage for a longer leash, but as I was led from the Titan's skull, I knew the most dangerous part of my captivity was just beginning. I was now a conscious participant in the Ork war machine, and I had just made an enemy who believed my existence was a sin against the universe. My new status as honorary Git came with immediate, tangible benefits. The reinforced cage in Gutwrench's lab was replaced with a semi-private corner of a large, open barracks, sectioned off by a hanging sheet of scrap canvas. It wasn't the Ritz, but it had a pile of marginally cleaner rags to sleep on and a bucket that was emptied semi-regularly. The change was psychological as much as physical. I was no longer purely a specimen. I was now a resource, an asset with a degree of autonomy. Grack and Snasket were still my minders, but their role had shifted from jailers to, well, I suppose handlers was the best term. They were responsible for my well-being, ensuring I was in fighting shape for the upcoming WAAAGH. This led to the bizarre spectacle of Snasket trying to teach me proper orc stretching techniques, which mostly involve hitting yourself repeatedly to loosen the muscles, and Grack offering me tactical advice. "Remember," Grack said, his metal jaw clicking earnestly, "when you're in the thick of it, don't just stand there. Yell something. WAAAGH is best, but anything loud will do. It confuses the enemy and makes you feel better." "I'll keep that in mind," I said. My battle cry is usually a string of profanities questioning my opponent's parentage, but I can try to work in a WAAAGH for local flavor. My newfound freedom allowed me to explore the camp more thoroughly. I was a bizarre sight, a lone pink human walking freely through a city of green skin Xenos. Most orcs ignored me, too busy with their own violent pursuits. Some would nod, a gesture of respect for the unkillable Umi. A few of the younger, more curious ones would approach, asking questions with a startling lack of malice. "Is it true you got your head chopped off and it grew back?" one scrawny youth asked, his eyes wide. "Twice," I confirmed. The second time was on a bet. "What's it feel like, dying?" "It feels inconvenient," I said, the understatement of the millennium. "Like a really bad commute that you don't remember, but your body is still pissed off about." I spent most of my time, however, in the Mekboyz workshops with Boss Park. He was the closest thing I had to an ally, driven not by a desire to use or destroy me, but by an insatiable, almost childlike curiosity. Our relationship became a series of bizarre philosophical debates conducted over the shrieking din of machinery. "So this fourth wall you talk about?" Boss Park shouted, welding a new gun barrel onto a truck. "It's like a window and you can see through it?" "More like a one-way mirror," I yelled back, handing him a wrench. "I can see out, and sometimes I talk to the people on the other side. They can't usually talk back, but they're watching all of this." Boss Park paused, his welding torch sputtering. "So we're in a story?" "Basically. And you know it?" "I'm aware of it. It's complicated." He thought about this for a long moment, the gears in his head, both literal and figurative, whirring. "So if you know you're in a story, and you know you're the main character, that's why you always come back? Because the story needs you?" I was taken aback. In his own crude, orky way, he had stumbled upon a profound truth. My meta-awareness wasn't just a quirky side effect. It was the very bedrock of my power. My belief wasn't just in myself, it was in my role as the protagonist. "Something like that," I admitted. "That's brilliant," Boss Park roared, so excited he accidentally welded the wrench to the truck. "So it's not about being tough, it's about being important. Your belief isn't that you're hard to kill, it's that you're necessary. The WAAAGH believes we're the best, so we are. You believe you have to be here for the story, so you are. It's the same thing." His excitement was contagious, and for a moment I forgot I was a prisoner. I was just a guy talking shop with a fellow craftsman, albeit his craft was violent engineering and mine was chaotic immortality. This camaraderie did not go unnoticed. During one of these sessions, I felt a familiar, chilling presence. Zogwork was watching us from the shadows of a half-built Gorkanaut, his glowing eyes narrowed to slits. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He just observed, a silent, malevolent specter, reminding me that my reprieve was temporary. The knowledge of the impending WAAAGH hung over the camp like an approaching storm. The energy was shifting, becoming more focused, more intense. The random fights became training exercises. The mechs worked around the clock, their belief-fueled machines glowing brighter, their engines roaring with a newfound ferocity. The WAAAGH field was condensing, becoming a tangible force you could almost taste, a metallic, electric flavor of pure, undiluted aggression. The night before the WAAAGH was to begin, Gitsnatcha held a massive rally in the main arena. I was required to attend, standing on the platform near his throne. Below us, tens of thousands of orcs gathered, a sea of green flesh and gleaming metal, their combined belief creating a psychic pressure that made the air hum. "Boys!" Gitsnatch's voice boomed, amplified by a dozen rattling speakers. "Tomorrow, we stop mucking about. Tomorrow, we show this sector what a proper WAAAGH looks like. We're gonna smash through the limes, smash their cities, and take all their DACA." The crowd erupted into a deafening roar. "And we ain't alone," Gitsnatcha bellowed, gesturing to me. "We got a secret weapon. We got the pink me. The one who won't stay dead. When they see him laughing as he gets blown to bits, they'll know the fight is already over. They'll know that we are da future, and da future is green." The roar that followed was seismic. It was a wave of pure psychic affirmation. I could feel their belief washing over me, not as an attack, but as an offering. They believed in me. They believed I was their good luck charm, their unkillable mascot. And in that moment, surrounded by the roaring green tide, a terrifying thing happened. I felt a part of me believe it, too. The WAAAGH energy was seductive. It was simple. It was clear. There was no moral ambiguity, no complex loyalties. There was only the fight, the laughter, the glorious, uncomplicated joy of being the strongest. As the rally reached a fever pitch, Gitsnatcha turned to me, his eyes gleaming in the firelight. "You see, Pink Thing? This is power. Real power. Not from a gun, not from a ship. From us, all of us, together." He leaned in close, his voice dropping so only I could hear it over the gin. "Forget your bosses. Forget your Imperium. They use you as a tool. We make you a symbol. Which one sounds better to you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to the crowd and raised his hydraulic claw. "WAAAGH!" The ocean of orcs thundered back. I stood there, on the precipice, the sound of 10,000 voices screaming for war crashing over me. I was their symbol. I was their weapon. And in less than 24 hours, I would be marching to war against my own species. My every death a rallying cry for the very Xenos who had tortured me. I had traded my cage for a gilded leash, and now Gitsnatcha was leading me to the battlefield. The ultimate test was here. Would I be their pawn, or would I find a way to break the chain? There is no sound in the galaxy quite like the start of an Ork WAAAGH. It begins not with a signal or a order, but with a deep, collective intake of breath from thousands of green lungs. A psychic drawing in of power that makes the air itself feel thin. Then comes the roar. It isn't just noise. It's a physical entity, a wall of sonic force that precedes the green tide, shaking the ground and vibrating in the teeth of every living thing for miles around. I stood at the forefront of that tide, and I felt it all. The raw, unfiltered WAAAGH energy was a drug, an addictive, exhilarating poison that flooded my system. It whispered promises of simple purpose and glorious violence. My own meta-awareness, my pink energy, buzzed in resonance with it, a terrifying harmony. For a fleeting, horrifying moment, it felt right. Then the charge began. There was no formation, no tactics. It was a raw, explosive eruption of motion. Orcs on bikes, in trucks, on foot, a chaotic, screaming avalanche of muscle and metal, all moving forward with a single unified belief. We are going to win because we cannot imagine anything else. I was swept along, a pig cork in a green tsunami. A mob of boys surrounded me, not as guards, but as enthusiastic escorts, shouting and firing their shooters into the air. "WAAAGH, Pinky! WAAAGH! Show the ummies what for!" I was their living talisman, and they were my rapturous congregation. We crashed into the Imperial defensive lines like a meteor. The initial contact was less a battle and more a demolition. Orc vehicles, powered by belief and sheer audacity, rammed through ferrocrete barricades that should have stopped them. Lasgun beams sliced through the air, but the orcs barely noticed, their sheer numbers and terrifying enthusiasm overwhelming disciplined volley fire, and I was in the middle of it. My role was simple: be visible, be unkillable. An Imperial heavy bolter team dug into a fortified bunker, opened up. The stream of mass reactive shells tore through the orcs around me, a storm of shredded green flesh and splintered bone. I was caught in the barrage. The world dissolved into a series of sharp, final impacts. My body was ripped apart. Darkness. Then, the wrenching, nauseating snap back to reality. I gasped, whole once more, standing in the exact spot where I'd been disintegrated. The heavy bolter team, seeing me simply reform from a red mist, froze for a critical second. Their hesitation was all the orcs needed. The bunker was overrun in a wave of choppas and laughter. The boys around me went wild. "See, he came back, just like that." Had been a spur, a jolt of adrenaline to the orcish psyche. Their WAAAGH field glowed brighter, their weapons fired with more conviction, their vehicles moved faster. I was a walking, talking, dying, and rebirthing confirmation of their own invincibility. We pushed deeper. I died again, caught in the blast of a crack missile. I came back to the sound of orcs cheering my name. I was shot by a sniper, my head exploding like a melon. I reformed to find the sniper's nest being torn apart by a mob of Gretchen who suddenly believed they could take on a veteran guardsman. Each death was a sacrifice on the altar of the WAAAGH. Each resurrection a miracle that strengthened my captors. I was an engine of war, and my suffering was the fuel. But something was changing inside me. The initial seductive rush of the WAAAGH was wearing off, burned away by the repetitive trauma of dying for a cause that wasn't mine. With each rebirth, my mind grew clearer, my own pink reality reasserting itself against the green psychic static. I saw the Imperial defenders not as faceless enemies, but as what they were, men. Young, terrified, brave men holding the line against an impossible horror. I saw a commissar executing a soldier for cowardice, only to be dragged down and torn apart by orcs a moment later. I saw a medic trying to staunch a wound only to be pulped by a stray rocket. This wasn't a glorious fight. This was a slaughter, and I was the banner under which it was conducted. My moment of ultimate clarity came when we breached the inner defensive ring. The fighting was at its most intense, a swirling melee of lasfire, explosions, and roaring greenskins. I saw him then, a young Imperial Guardsman, no older than the kid from the dropship. He was cornered against a shattered wall, his lasgun empty, his bayonet bent. 3 Ork boys were advancing on him, laughing, taking their time. The guardsman's eyes were wide with terror, but he held his ground, fumbling for a combat knife. He was going to die. There was no doubt. And in that moment, I saw myself reflected in his wide, desperate eyes, not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as a man, a human, one of his own. The WAAAGH's siren song vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp silence in my soul. This was wrong. This was all wrong. The lead orc raised his choppa for the killing blow. I didn't think. I moved. I stepped between them. The choppa came down, shearing through my shoulder and deep into my chest. I didn't flinch. I looked the orc boy dead in the eye. The fun's over, I growled. The orc stared, confused. "Pinky, what you doing?" Behind me, the young guardsman was frozen, staring at the unkillable man who had just taken a death blow for him. I reached up, grabbed the orc's wrist, and held the embedded choppa in place. My blood poured over his hand. "I said," I repeated, my voice dropping to a deadly calm, "that's enough." The other orcs stopped, their laughter dying. The battle seemed to pause around us, a bubble of surreal stillness in the chaos. I was breaking the script. The unkillable mascot was refusing to play his part. Then, from the heart of the orc lines, a voice cut through the din, cold with betrayed fury. "Pinky." I turned. Warboss Gitsnatcha was there, his hydraulic claws smoking, his eyes burning with a rage far more dangerous than any WAAAGH-fueled joy. He had seen my defiance. He had seen me choose a single worthless human life over the momentum of his entire WAAAGH. The deal was broken. The silence that fell around us was more terrifying than any roar. The orcs, so recently buoyed by my deaths, now looked confused and angry. The Imperial defenders, seeing the orc advance stall, used the moment to regroup, their eyes fixed on the bizarre standoff between the Warboss and the pink human. Gitsnatcha took a step forward, the ground shaking. The orc boy whose choppa was still buried in my chest wisely let go of the handle and scurried back. "You!" Gitsnatcha's voice was a low, dangerous grind, all pretense of camaraderie gone. "You spit on my offer. You spit on WAAAGH." I yanked the choppa from my torso with a wet, sucking sound, tossing it aside. The wound sealed shut in seconds, but the metaphorical line had been drawn. "Your offer was a leash," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "I don't do leashes." Behind Gitsnatcha, I saw Zogwart emerge from the press of boys, his glowing eyes blazing with vindicated fury. "I told you, Warboss. The infection must be purged. It rejects the Great Breen. It must be unmade. This is your last chance, Yumi." Gitsnatcha ignored the weird boy, his focus entirely on me. "Get back into fight. Die for my WAAAGH, like you're supposed to. Or I let Zogwart do what he wants, and I promise you, his way of making you dead will be a lot less fun than mine." I looked past him. I looked at the sea of confused, hostile green faces. I looked at the young guardsman who was still pressed against the wall, watching me as if I were a ghost. I looked at the smoking ruins of a world, the broken bodies in Imperial and Orcish colors alike. This was the 41st millennium. A universe of endless war, of grim darkness, where there were no heroes, only victims and butchers. I had spent my entire existence here as a nuisance, a chaotic neutral force, surviving through sheer, stubborn refusal to play by the rules. But some lines you don't cross. Some costumes you don't wear. I took a step forward, not towards Gitsnatcha, but to the side, placing myself squarely between the Ork horde and the shattered Imperial line. I bent down and picked up a fallen lasgun, its power pack dead. It was useless as a weapon, but it was a symbol. I planted the butt of the lasgun in the blood-soaked earth at my feet. "I'm drawing a line," I announced, my voice calm but ringing with absolute finality. "It's right here. You want that boy? You want this line? You come through me." The audacity of it, the sheer suicidal stupidity hung in the air. A single, unkillable man against an army. For a moment, Gitsnatcha was too stunned to speak. Then his rage erupted. "You think you can stop us? You think your little trick will save you? We will kill you 100 times, 1,000. We will grind you to dust and scatter you to Dawarp." "Probably," I admitted with a shrug. "But here's the thing. You wanted me as a symbol for your WAAAGH, a symbol of invincibility. Well, you got one, but you don't get to choose what I symbolize anymore." I swept my arm towards the terrified Imperial Guardsmen behind me. "From now on, every time I get back up, it won't be for you. It'll be for them. Every time you kill me, you're not proving how strong you are. You're proving how stubborn I am. You're not fighting a soldier. You're fighting a statement. And statements are a lot harder to kill." Zogwart could contain himself no longer. "Enough of this heresy," he shrieked, raising his hands. The air crackled with unstable psychic power. "The glitch ends now. I will unravel you. I will sever your thread from the tapestry of reality." A vortex of emerald energy, shot through with black tendrils of pure negation, formed between his hands. It was a weapon designed not to destroy the body, but to annihilate the soul, to erase the very concept of Wade Wilson from existence. Gitsnatcha gave a grim, curt nod. He had made his choice. The weird boy unleashed his power. The vortex shot towards me, a screaming hole in reality, a tide of unbeing. I didn't try to run. I didn't try to dodge. I stood my ground, planted behind my symbolic line in the sand. I reached down, not into my body, but into the core of my being. That place of meta-awareness, that unshakable belief in my own narrative importance. As the wave of erasure hit me, I didn't fight it with force. I accepted it. I let it wash over me, through me, and I imposed my own reality upon it. I am Wade Wilson. I am the punchline to a cosmic joke. My story isn't over until I say it is. The null energy didn't explode. It saturated me. For a moment, I flickered, like a bad hologram. The orcs gasped. The guardsmen recoiled. I could feel Zogwart's will pressing down, trying to delete me from the source code of the universe. And then I solidified. I was still there. I felt drained, stretched thin, but I was there. My own belief, my personal reality, had acted as an anchor, holding me fast against the tide of oblivion. Zogwart stared, his power spent, his face a mask of utter terrified disbelief. Impossible. I took a deep, shaky breath and gave him a wobbly grin. "You can't fire the main character, Sparky. The audience would riot." Gitsnatcha roared in pure, undiluted fury. He raised his massive shooter. "Then we do it to Orky way. Boys, kill him. Kill him till he stays dead." The green tide surged forward, breaking against the line I had drawn. I was engulfed. Choppas cut me down. Shooters blew me apart. Rocket explosions vaporized me. I died, again, and again, and again. But each time I came back, I was standing on that same line. Each resurrection was a little slower, a little more painful. My personal reality strained to its absolute limit against the relentless physical violence of the WAAAGH. I was no longer winning a battle. I was making a point. I was a spectacle of pure, idiotic defiance. A symbol, just as Gitsnacha had wanted, but not of orcish invincibility. I was a symbol of the one thing in this grim, dark universe that could never truly be extinguished. A bad idea whose time had come. The orcs were fighting a war. I was staging a one-man protest. And as the bodies piled up and I kept getting back up, I looked the raging warboss in the eye from across the battlefield and knew with every fiber of my reforming being that I was the most annoying thing he had ever seen. And in the 41st millennium, that was the closest thing to a victory I was ever going to get.